And it's a great day to start Python, try to learn something new, look at if statements and flow control. I even have the doggy cam up and running. So that is my network architect. Her name is Bingo. Say hello. Hi, Bingo. Hi. There she goes. And so in today's live stream, I really wanted to go over um, Python and if statements. It's just in the next iteration of what I'm learning for my zero to network automation series. So just wanted to take a sip of coffee before we get started because there's a little bit to learn here. I think this is where it starts getting more challenging for me as I learn Python. Maybe it's the same for you. Just let me know what you guys think, where you're coming from, where you are with Python. How much do you know, or are you just like me, just getting started, or have tried to pick it up again? Because as a network engineer, for me, I have skipped it for quite a long time, and I think now is the time to pick it up. I'm starting to see a lot of projects where Python scripts could be very useful, and I think if statements, if else statements are going to be important for querying network devices and looking at things like interfaces and who knows other things with Wi-Fi. So why don't we kind of get into it here? When I talk about Python and flow control, what I've read from Automate the Boring Things, this is the Automate the Boring Things book that I've been with Python that I've been reading. I'm about 4 chapters in now, and when I go through the subject, I do write it out into a blog post that would be helpful for me to understand the topics. And so as I understood flow control, it's a way because of what happens is Python scripts, they don't go from top to bottom on the script, right? It's not a sequential thing that they process every line of code one right after the other. There's going to be things that the code goes through in order to determine some sort of condition. So it's not like going to the grocery store and then trying to figure out what you have to purchase, right? And so there's blocks of code that we write out to evaluate 2 specific conditions. And what those conditions could be is you match, maybe do an evaluation, and when you meet that condition, you run another block of code. And so that's what the if statement could be about. So if I think about it from a network engineering standpoint, we start off with saying, hey, is this network interface up? Is Ethernet 1/1 up? Then you have a condition there. It's either a yes or a no, right? Yes, it is up. Okay, well, let's check again in 5 minutes. So then we go back to that statement, that condition there, is the interface up? If it's a no, then we execute another sequence of code, another block of code, and we say send an alert as an example. And once you send that alert, we go back to checking if the interface is up again. And so when we build this block of code, we're going to evaluate to something and execute the next sequence of code. And for me, that as I'm looking at this right now, it is a matter of an easy and is it up or down kind of thing. And so the components of flow control is you got to perform some sort of evaluation based on the result of that evaluation, you're going to execute code, and that code is indented. And so as we look at what this looks like, I'll share my screen here. Good morning, David. Thanks for joining me here. And let me know where you're at with Python. Maybe you can help me out here with some of the if statements. And let's see. So you should be able to see my screen. And so before we look at an if statement and we look at flow control, we want to look at comparison operators. So comparison operators, there's different kinds, right? So we have something like equal to, and that could an equal to operator could look something like interface, and it's two equal signs, and then I'm gonna say up in quotations, right? It doesn't know what it is yet. Doesn't know what interface is, but that could be an operator. The equal to. The other operator is the not equal to. So that could be interface is not equal to up. So that there is one of the operators not equal to. This is another operator equal to, right? And then Python's giving me an error because it doesn't know what interface is. The other operator is the less than. And when I look at some of these operators, the first thing that comes to mind is maybe like bandwidth, for example. So you can say 800 megabits per second is less than 1,000 megabits per second. And that's true. So you can see that it evaluates to true. Even if I defined what interface was, let me see. Interface is up. Now I can say, does interface equal up? True. Does interface equal down? False. Right. So those are our operators. This is an assignment. I'm assigning up to interface. So we have our less than, our equal to, and our not equal to. Does interface not equal to down? True. And that's because I've assigned it to up. Now the other operator is the greater than. So again, if we look at the bandwidth, right? And the reason why I look at bandwidth is because sometimes we want to know if we've exceeded bandwidth for an interface, or maybe you're monitoring bandwidth for your WAN and you want to know if it meets a certain threshold. And that's where I think of these operators. And so you can say, hey, is 900 megabits per second greater than 800 megabits per second? That's true. And maybe you evaluate to that, set a certain threshold, and then we send off an alert, a warning, something, right? That's what I'm thinking about as I look at different systems that I use, like some monitoring systems that have these sort of logics in there. So that's the greater than comparison operator. The other one is the less than or equal to comparison operator. And that we can say, hey, it's 950 megabits per second greater than or equal to 800 megabits per second. True. Is it greater than or equal to 1,000 megabits per second? False. And on the opposite end of that, you could say, is 1,200 megabits per second less than 1,000 or less than or equal to 1,000 megabits per second? False. And so those are our comparison operators. We got the equal to. We've also got the not equal to. Then we have our, maybe I can use variables for this. Equal to, that's our equal to operator. What does the equal to operator look like? That's it, right? Equal to, then not equal to, less than, greater than, less than or equal to, and greater than or equal to. Those are the operators, right? So I think that's, to me, as I look into Python more and how we would use Python for network automation, the more I think about how we would use these operators to compare certain values and then execute a piece of code. And so as I was going through the chapter on if statements and flow control, this is where I start to really think about how I would structure code moving forward, because I'm already thinking about how I would use this. So I try to come up with some ideas where it would be relevant and it would make sense for me. And so what I want to do is go through the if statements now. And so if statements, I think they're fairly easy to understand. It's not as complicated as some of the other things I've seen with Python. And so if we go and open terminal again, we have the if statement, and the syntax of it is you start off with the if keyword. If something is going to contain a clause, then it's going to have a block of code, and then Python executes based on that condition that it's met. So if this condition is true for this Python statement, then we'll execute the block of code that follows it. So the if word, a condition, and we'll stick with interfaces. So I'm going to say, before we do that, I think interface is up. That's what I've set it to. Yeah. Okay. So if interface, this is our condition now. I'm saying if this interface is up. So that there is our clause or a condition that we're going to run. And then at the end of that statement, you put a colon. And then hit enter, and you have indented code, an indented block of code, right? And so from here, we will put what that execution is going to perform, that Python's going to do. So I'm going to say print interface is operational. And there you go. It just ran the code for me, right? So here we go again, the if keyword and the condition, and end it with a colon. On the next line, you have indented code. This is the code, the block of code that Python will execute if it meets this condition. And to true or false, really, is what it is. And if it's true, then it's going to print interface is operational. Now, what happens, though, if it's not true? Because you really have two conditions you can meet here for an interface. It's either up or it's down, right? So that's where the else clause comes in, right? So we talk about an if-else clause. So the way that would look like is first you would have the if statement here at the top with its condition, but we want to see what happens when it results in false. Otherwise, right now it's just checking for true. Because if I said interface is down, and then we ran our if statement again, what do you guys think would happen here? So if I executed this, nothing would happen because interface is not up. It's currently down per this variable that I set. And it's checking if this variable interface is up, and it's not. And so since it's not up, it just doesn't print anything because I don't have the else clause in there. And so for the else clause, it is very similar syntax to the if statement up above, but it is a code that is executed if the condition is the opposite of what we're checking for. So what I will say, if interface is up. Oh, this is better ran with Visual Studio Code, because if I do this now, I don't even know how I could add in the else clause, but we'll type it in. Right. I don't know if this will work. So else. So this is the else statement, and we'll end it with a colon. And then you would have indented code, and then you would type what you want executed by Python. Interface is non-operational. But let me switch over to Visual Studio Code because this doesn't quite work in the Python world. So this is Visual Studio Code to help write my Python scripts. And what I want to do here, I have where I would type in my code and then I could execute it down here on the bottom. Now I won't go into what Visual Studio Code is and how it works. You can take a look, but we're gonna type in some code here. Let me make these a little bit bigger so you guys can see it. So we're gonna generate some code. We'll stick with the interface example. So I'm gonna say if actually let me set the interface variable. Interface equals or is down. Or set that variable, and then we go if interface is up, colon, right? So this is our if statement. Then we'll want to indent. Then we can say print interface is operational, right? Now the else statement, we'll type else and then colon. That's the syntax. And that's because we're wanting to meet the opposite of this condition here. So if it's false, then we're going to run this block of code, which would be print interface is non-operational. And what's cool about Visual Studio Code is I've got my terminal down here. I can execute this code, but I got to save it. Interface status.py. So there you go. Interface is non-operational. That's what it executes to because interface is currently down. If we change this to up and save the code, we could then execute that again. And now it says interface is operational. And so that's the very basics of the if else statement, right? The if keyword followed by your condition and a colon, or the clause. And if it meets the condition here, if it's true, then it'll print this statement. But if it is not true, else statement, colon, run or execute this block of code here. And that's what we do when we run this block of code. Now, what if there are other clauses that you have to execute on? Because life isn't as simple as true and false for, it's either this or that, but it could be this or it could be this and it could be that. You might have multiple conditions that could be met for something, right? And so this is where I start thinking about, all right, what about utilization of an interface? What if we have high utilization? What if we set a warning for high utilization or even error rate on an interface? What do you want to do with that? And so that's where the else if statement comes into use here. And so it follows the initial if statement, and then you'll have else if. You just meet those conditions. Very similar syntax for that. And what we'll do is we'll write code for different things, right? So first, let's talk about the else if statement. We'll go ahead and let's add to this. We'll add the else if statement. So when we have our if statement here, right, we end it with a colon, we have indented block of code. We go to the next line. The else if statement will be run by elif, E-L-I-F. Then we set the clause here. So let's just say utilization, and let's say, I got to define these. So let's just say utilization is 80. And so this, I'm assigning 80, an integer, to this variable. So I kind of talked about this in a previous, I talked about this in a previous live stream. So if we have the else if utilization is greater than 70, right? So now we have a comparison operator that I talked about earlier, and I have another integer. So I'm comparing whatever I have stored here in this variable utilization to this integer. So if interface is up, print interface is operational. Else if utilization is greater than 70, colon, same syntax, and then indented block of code, we'll say print warning high utilization. Right. And then we can check to see how this code would execute. I'm guessing since because it's up, it's just going to say, interface is operational. Yep. So maybe, yeah, we look at that. What if we say it's down? So it's kind of where my code breaks down. It's executing the piece of code, and since it matches on the first thing, it meets the condition for the first thing, it will match on that. But now that I made it down, it matches that the utilization is greater than 70. So now it's printing this. But if the utilization, obviously we wouldn't have a down interface with the utilization of 80%. But I'm just trying to show you an example of how the syntax works out. I'm not quite there yet with building out great code. And if we had another clause that we had to meet, actually we can make it work. We can make it work. So you could say, maybe you say else if interface is down, print interface is down or non-operational. Whoa. And then at the end, you have an else statement that catches everything else. If it doesn't match the else if statement, we could say print interface does not exist. So then we can look at this code, execute it, see what we get. So since it's down, interface is non-operational, right? You could have other else if statements here if you wanted to. What could we have? We'll just say stuck. Interface. So you can see how you can have multiple else if statements there, and then at the end you have an else statement that captures it all, and you could execute on that code to see how it meets the conditions and which block of code would run. So I have it as down. If I wanted to say meet that condition, we'll remove the utilization, save, execute. So now we've met this block, this condition, and executed on this block of code. So hopefully you understand how the if statement works, else if, and down to the else. And so these are just very simple examples that I've created as I've tried to learn how the if, else, if, and else statements work. Try to understand how we would meet the specific conditions and how to execute on specific code. Now, when we talk about these if statements and grabbing interface statuses and things like that, that will come later down the road as we try to execute a block of code to get that information. And when we get that information, we'll store it into a variable like I did in this example. And then execute a clause to determine what kind of condition it's in, and then execute that code. And so as we determine what those statuses are for an interface or what the utilization is like for an interface, that's where we would have a much more robust piece of code. Right now, we're still very early. I am still very, very early in this network automation journey, still learning how Python works and how I would use these flow control statements. And in the next couple of live streams, I'll go into things like functions and loops, because that's where we'll start putting different things together in order to come up with some script that I could use to check on a network device. And so that's when I'll bring out a network device to work on in order to really get hands-on with Python and understand how some of this code works. And really it's an overly simplified example of what I've done for flow control and if statements. And when we look at a network device, we're really going to be evaluating through if, else if, and else statements. So I can tell it's used quite a lot, especially when you have loops as well, because you're going to loop through a number of interfaces, and we'll start getting into that. So this is pretty short, like introduction to if statements. Hopefully it makes sense to you as it makes sense to me. And then we'll get more into some advanced usage of this and as it relates to network engineering. But I want to thank you guys for joining me here on this video. If you have any questions or if you have any tips, you can leave them in the comments down below. And be sure to follow me if you want to keep following on this network automation journey. This is part of the Zero to Network Automation series that I'm creating. This is my public facing accountability to learning Python. It's a goal of mine for the next 12 months to really pick up Python and use network automation to really enhance what I do with network engineering and all of the different devices that I look at. So everything from Wi-Fi to switches to firewalls, routers, you name it, anything that has that's connected to the network. I want to be able to use Python to automate some tasks that we do on our day-to-day work. But thanks again. Give me a follow if you found this interesting and you want to keep following on this journey and learning Python yourself. But thank you guys for joining me.